In the heart of the quiet village of Nambala, nestled between lush fields and ancient hills, lived a girl named Abeni. With her dark, coiled hair always tied back with palm string, and her soft eyes reflecting the morning sun, she was known for her silence and solitude. Unlike the other girls who danced during festivals or sang while pounding yam, Abeni spent her time near the edge of the sacred grove, where an enormous tree older than the village itself stood. This tree, known as Ogbanje, was believed to be the resting place of the village ancestors. Children were warned never to play near it. Elders spoke to it only during offerings. But for Abeni, the tree was not just sacred, it was alive. At night, when even the hyenas dared not howl, Abeni would sit under the thick canopy and listen. She could hear the whispers in the wind, the voices in the creaking branches. And when she closed her eyes, she swore the roots pulsed like a beating heart. One night, Ogbanje spoke clearly to her for the first time. "You are chosen, child of Earth," it murmured. "You carry the burden and the gift." From that night on, Abeni's life changed. The tree began to reveal secrets of herbs that could heal fevers, of hidden wells untouched by drought, and even of dangers lurking in the forest. She began to help the villagers subtly. When children fell ill, she appeared with the right leaves. When a woman's labor turned difficult, she arrived with a poultice that soothed pain. No one knew how she did it, and whispers began to stir. But not all whispers were kind. The village chief, Okonkwo, a man of wide girth and narrow soul, had always disliked Abeni's mother, who had once rejected his advances. Seeing Abeni now receiving attention and praise stirred something dark within him. He began to observe her from a distance, noting her visits to the sacred grove and the offerings she never gave. He knew the rules. No one speaks to Ogbanje. It is to be worshipped, not spoken with. He suspected Abeni was breaking the sacred taboo, and that suspicion would soon become his weapon. The annual Yam Festival approached, a time of drumming, feasting, and thanksgiving to the gods. The village bustled with preparations. Colorful fabrics were dusted off, goats were fattened, and drums were tested for resonance. Abeni, despite her isolation, was asked to help with preparing healing ointments for the elders, a subtle recognition of her growing repute. Yet beneath the laughter and the music, the chief schemed. Chief Okonkwo called for a private meeting with the village council. He spoke in veiled tones of traditions dishonored, sacred spaces defiled, and powers misused. He spun his tale with care, never naming Abeni, but planting enough seeds of suspicion. The council listened, some with furrowed brows, others with blank stares, unsure of what they were being led into. Meanwhile, Abeni remained unaware, her hands deep in bowls of crushed leaves and oils. The night of the festival came. The village square shimmered with torchlight, and the rhythmic beat of the drums carried far into the hills. Abeni stood quietly at the back, her simple wrapper contrasting with the glittering attires of the dancers. Then, like a lion pouncing on its prey, Okonkwo stepped into the circle of dancers and raised his staff. He denounced a traitor among them, someone who spoke to the sacred tree without permission, who practiced unnatural rites. He pointed his staff at Abeni. Gasps filled the air. She stood frozen, caught in a silence so deep it roared in her ears. Her eyes searched the crowd for any friendly face, but saw only fear and confusion. She tried to speak, but the chief's voice drowned her out. At dawn, the elders gathered in the sacred circle, an area marked by ancient stones beneath the baobab trees. Abeni, eyes swollen from sleeplessness, stood in the center. The trial was ceremonial but brutal. Questions flew like arrows. Why had she gone to the grove at night? What voices had she heard? Had she made offerings to spirits unknown heart? Abeni tried to explain, to speak of the tree's voice, of its guidance, but each word only deepened their fear. They spoke of curses and madness, of ancient tales where those who listened to trees brought famine and plague. The chief watched from his ornate seat, face calm, eyes gleaming. When the verdict came, banishment, it was like a stone striking her chest. She was to leave Nambala before the sun touched the peak of the hill. With only a satchel of food and her mother's old shawl, Abeni walked through the eastern gate as villagers watched from their huts, eyes filled with a mix of pity and relief. The forest that bordered Nambala was thick with vines and legends. They called it cursed, where old spirits roamed and the trees never forgot trespassers. The first night was cruel. The cold air bit through her shawl, and strange sounds kept her from sleep. But she found a hollow between two tree roots that reminded her of Ogbanje's embrace. Wrapping herself tightly, she whispered into the darkness, "If you are still with me, guide me." And from deep within the forest, a soft, rustling reply came. "Follow the root that glows." The glowing root led Abeni through the forest like a firefly in the dark. As she followed its trail, it twined through thorned underbrush and over moss-covered stones. The root did not end. It descended into a grove where the trees stood taller, older, and crowned with silver moss. In the center stood a tree, even. Greater than Ogbanje, its bark glowing faintly. "This," whispered the wind, "is the tree of memory." Abeni approached with reverence, and as her fingers brushed its trunk, visions burst in her mind. Visions of the first ancestors of Nambala, of the villages packed with the forest, and of a great betrayal that broke it. This tree, unlike Ogbanje, held the forgotten truths. She dropped to her knees, overwhelmed. She had not just been banished, she had been sent to uncover what the village dared to forget. As Abeni camped beneath the tree of memory, the forest came alive in unexpected ways. Small orbs of light floated around her, sometimes dancing, sometimes observing. One night, a spirit in the form of a child appeared. It introduced itself as Ebo, a guardian of the grove. Ebo told Abeni that many had once communed with trees, but fear and hunger for power led the villagers to silence the forest. The sacred trees stopped speaking to all but a few, and now only Abeni could hear them. Ebo warned her she would need strength, as Okonkwo's actions had awoken not only fear, but something darker beneath Nambala. And if she did not act soon, the entire village would wither from within. Days passed as Abeni explored the forest, guided by the root and Ebo's stories. One morning, she came upon a clearing unlike the others. Dead leaves, blackened soil, and trees twisted unnaturally. Ebo called it the cursed womb. It was where the elders once buried a sacred relic to hide their shame. The heart seed, a piece of the tree of memory stolen generations ago. Abeni felt drawn to it, and when she stepped into the clearing, the spirits screamed. Shadows rushed from the trees, cold and sharp. Only when she began to chant the old names of the ancestors, names whispered to her by Ogbanje, did the shadows retreat. She collapsed, exhausted. But in the earth, she felt the seed stir. Abeni spent the next 3 days nurturing the ground. With leaves from the healing bush, water from the hidden spring, and chants from her dreams, she called to the heart seed. Slowly, something began to grow. A small sprout, glowing red like ember, emerged. Ebo watched in awe. "This seed," he said, "contains memory, pain, and power. Plant it again at the tree of memory, and it will awaken what was lost. But to return the seed, Abeni would need to guard it." And already the whispers in the gum. Wind warned of new dangers. Okonkwo had sent hunters into the forest. The hunters from Nambala were not mere trackers. They were chosen men, trained in both weapons and fearcraft. Led by Okonkwo's cousin Jide, they were told that Abeni consorted with demons. Their mission was clear: bring her back in chains or silence her. Abeni first sensed them when the birds fell quiet. She hid in the upper branches, Ebo by her side. For 2 days, she watched them move through the forest, cutting plants, breaking branches, and frightening spirits. But the forest had grown fond of Abeni. It twisted paths, confused their tracks, and when Jide came close, the roots moved silently to mislead him. On the 3rd night, the hunters lit a fire too close to the cursed clearing. It sparked a reaction from the spirits. Vines erupted from the ground, wrapping around the men's ankles. Ebo appeared in his full form, glowing white, eyes like moons, and the men screamed in terror. Jide managed to throw a dagger at Abeni as she tried to protect the heart seed, grazing her shoulder. but as his blade struck a tree behind her, the tree bled sap and howled. The forest had marked him. Abeni collapsed with the wound burning like fire. Ebo summoned a healing plant, but it was not enough. They needed ancient medicine. Abeni, barely able to stand, staggered toward the tree of memory, hoping it would give her strength. As she touched its trunk, the tree pulsed, and the pain faded. In her mind, she saw a woman, a priestess from long ago, who had once stood where Abeni now did. She too had been betrayed by the village. The whisper said, "You are the echo of the first keeper. Finish what we began." The vision grew clearer. Abeni saw rituals lost to time, songs no longer sung, and a covenant broken when greed led the elders to silence the trees. The tree of memory had waited for centuries for a new keeper to restore the bond. Abeni was not merely a girl with a gift. She was a link in a long chain of guardians. Her banishment was not a punishment, but an initiation. She now carried the legacy of those who once walked as bridges between earth and spirit. That night, Abeni dreamed of Nambala. The fields had turned gray, children cried from sickness, and the river had dried. Okonkwo stood in the square, screaming at the sky as cracks opened in the earth beneath him. The tree in the village square, once a symbol of life, stood leafless and decaying. When she woke, Ebo confirmed the vision. Idu. Village was falling apart without the forest's blessing, and only the return of the heartseed to the tree of memory could begin healing. But first, Abeni would need allies, both spirit and human. In the deepest part of the forest, Abeni met a girl named Kalechi, the daughter of a weaver who had once lived in Nambala, but fled after her mother was accused of witchcraft. Kalechi, nimble and clever, had survived in the forest by weaving shelters from vines and silken threads spun by spirit spiders. Kalechi was skeptical of Abeni at first, thinking her a spy from the village. But when Abeni healed one of her spider companions using a song from Ogbanje, Kalechi's suspicion turned to awe. The two formed a bond quickly. For the first time since her exile, Abeni felt kinship. She told Kalechi of the heartseed and the task before her, and Kalechi, with fierce determination, pledged her support. The forest spirits sensed the alliance and called Abeni and Kalechi to a moonlit glade. There, surrounded by the whispering trees and watching eyes of owls, a pact was formed. Abeni and Kalechi swore upon the thorns of the sacred rose, a plant that bloomed only under truth, to defend the seed and restore the bond. The forest sealed their pact with marks on their skin, glowing like silver thread. They were now more than friends, they were sisters of purpose. That night, Ebo warned them of a vision he had received. Okonkwo was preparing a new ritual, one that would sever Nambala forever from the spirit world. Back in Nambala, Okonkwo gathered the village's spiritual leaders. Under the guise of protection, he planned a ritual using ancient forbidden fire, a flame that consumes spirit roots. If unleashed near Ogbanje, it would silence the tree forever. The ritual required a sacrifice. Okonkwo chose an orphan girl, claiming it would appease the ancestors. The village was torn, some uneasy but too afraid to speak. Word of the ritual reached the forest, through birds, through breeze, and Abeni knew. They had to stop it, or everything would be lost. Abeni and Kalechi disguised themselves using bark cloth and ash. With the guidance of forest spirits, they returned to the edge of Nambala under the cover of night. Abeni's heart pounded. She had once called this place home. Now it was the battleground of destiny. At the sacred square, the ritual had begun. Flames danced, and the orphan girl sobbed. Just as Okonkwo raised the burning branch, a windstorm erupted. Abeni stepped forward, her voice rising above the howl. This ritual is not of the ancestors. It is a curse of man. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Okonkwo snarled, calling for her capture. But Ogbanje stirred. Its bark cracked, its branches rose, and a deafening voice echoed through the village. You silence truth and honor lies. The keeper has returned. Roots broke through stone, coiling around the ritual flames and extinguishing them. The orphan girl was freed. The villagers fell to their knees in shock. Abeni stood tall, the heart seed pulsing in her palm. It was time to choose: destroy Okonkwo's legacy or awaken Nambala's soul. Abeni's fingers tightened around the heart seed. With the village holding its breath and the wind echoing Ogbanje's roar, she stepped to the sacred altar where the seed was first stolen centuries ago. Her voice, calm but unyielding, called the names of the forgotten keepers. The villagers watched in awe as light spiraled from her mouth into the roots below. But Okonkwo lunged forward, grabbing a smoldering coal from the extinguished fire. "You will not bind us to old ghosts," he roared. Kelechi stepped between him and Abeni, taking the blow to her arm. Abeni, in fury and grief, dropped the heart seed into the altar's basin. It sank into the earth, and the sky turned gold. The earth trembled. Ogbanje's roots glowed with white fire, and ghostly figures emerged, ancestors in flowing cloth and glowing eyes. The village cried out, some in fear, others in reverence. One elder dropped to her knees, recognizing her own grandmother among the spirits. The spirits did not speak in words, but in song. The trees sang and the ground pulsed like a drum. Abeni was lifted off her feet, enveloped in light. The tree of memory responded across the forest, awakening others like it. The ancestral link had been restored. The ancestors circled Okonkwo, their gaze heavy. He fell to his knees, sweat dripping. The chief tried to speak, to justify his actions, but his words were ash. The ancestors showed the village his hidden sins, theft of sacred relics, lies spread through fear, and deaths ordered in silence. The villagers turned away from him. The spirits declared him forgotten, the worst punishment. Stripped of memory and name, Okonkwo wandered out of the village, a hollow man. No one followed. With the heart seed returned and Okonkwo exiled, the village looked to Abeni. She was offered the title of High Priestess, but she refused. "The forest is my home," she said. "My work is not to rule, but to remember." Abeni chose instead to rebuild the Keeper's Path, an ancient journey between sacred groves. She invited children to learn the old ways, not through fear, but through curiosity and reverence. Kelechi stayed by her side, her weaver's hands now crafting symbols of harmony from vine and silk. With guidance from Abeni and the spirits, the village began to heal. Sick children grew strong. Crops flourished with blessing songs. The once silent wells now sang when drawn from. Abeni taught the villagers to listen, not just to trees but to wind, stone, and stream. Some elders resisted the change, but most saw the truth. Nambala had been sick because it had forgotten how to belong to the land. Slowly, the curse that had withered their spirits began to lift. Forgiveness flowed through the air like morning mist. The dry river in Abeni's vision began to flow once more. Ogbanje whispered that a hidden spring deep within the forest had been unlocked by the heartseed's return. Abeni, Kelechi, and Go followed its source to a waterfall of shimmering light. There, they found carvings older than Nambala itself, of humans and trees dancing as equals. Abeni wept, for she saw her own face among them. "The past lives in us," she said, and the river carried that truth back to the village. Abeni and Kelechi built a school within the grove, open to all. Children learned songs of healing, stories of the trees, and how to weave spirit thread. The spirits themselves became teachers, appearing in dreams and rituals to guide the curious. One child, Aomide, showed signs of the gift early. She could calm storms with a hum. Abeni smiled, recognizing the birth of the next keeper's legacy. She whispered to Ogbanje, "May the roots never sleep again." One night, Ebo warned of movement in the northern forest. A forgotten tribe, once allied with Nambala, later turned exiled for warmongering, had returned. They had seen the lights of the ancestors and thought them a threat. Abeni and Kelechi set out to meet them. It was dangerous, for these people wore bone armor and spoke with venom. But Abeni offered peace. She shared the story of the heart seed and sang the song of the first keeper. The tribe's oldest warrior dropped his spear. "We have wandered long in darkness," he said. "Lead." Goose home. Abeni welcomed the returning tribe to Nambala's edge. There was tension. Memories of old wars stirred in both hearts and soil. But the children played together freely, and it was in their laughter that the first bridges were built. A great feast was held, with dishes from both cultures. Under the tree of memory, Abeni placed a second heart seed, gifted by the spirits. It sprouted within hours. The forest was growing not just trees, but unity. To honor the restoration of balance, Abeni and the village declared a new celebration, the Festival of Whispers. Each person wrote a truth or hope on a leaf and tied it to a tree. At night, the wind carried the whispers to the spirits. The first festival was filled with song, color, and story. Even Ebo danced, glowing brighter than ever. As the villagers held hands under the stars, Abeni looked to the forest and whispered, "Let this be our beginning, not our end." Kalichi's arm healed slowly, but her spirit burned brighter. She began weaving not just cloth but spiritual patterns, canopies that shimmered in the wind, capturing whispers of the forest. These tapestries were displayed in the grove, each one telling a different tale: the betrayal of the heart seed, the exile of the keeper, the return of the ancestors. Villagers and forest dwellers alike began bringing offerings, feathers, beads, poems, to pin onto the tapestries. Each thread, each gift became a part of the living memory of Nambala. Kalechi had become the keeper of stories, standing beside Abeni as her equal. One dawn, the animals grew restless. Smoke began to rise from the foot of the ancestral hill. Ebo warned that something ancient had awakened, a slumbering fire spirit, buried long ago when humans made a pact to never use fire against the earth again. Abeni led a small group to investigate. There they found a fissure spewing smoke and embers. The spirit, named Olubara, was stirring in anger. It had sensed the ritual flames Okonkwo had tried to use. Now it demanded justice, or it would consume the land. Abeni approached Olubara with reverence. She offered not gold or blood, but memory. She sang the song of her exile, of her pain, and her hope. Kalechi offered her most precious tapestry, one that held the face of every child in Nambala. The spirit cooled. Flames faded into glowing coals. It accepted their offerings and returned to slumber. But it left behind a warning in the ashes. Should Nambala forget its lessons, fire would rise again, not to purify, but to destroy. Abeni called together a new village council, not of chiefs or warriors, but of listeners, keepers, weavers, healers, and even children. Each voice held equal weight, each story equal value. They met beneath Ogbanje every moon's turn. Under this council, justice returned. Feuds were settled with truth circles, not swords. Lost names were restored. Trees were planted for each apology made. The land itself seemed to hum with approval. A new governance was born, not of fear, but of memory. With peace thriving, Nambala became a place of pilgrimage. Traders from distant lands came to learn, not just barter. Abeni helped design the Market of Peace, a circular plaza where trade began only after a ritual of gratitude. Here, forest herbs were exchanged for desert spices. Songs were traded for masks. Language barriers fell to the rhythm of drumming. Abeni made sure the Heartseed story was told before every market day, so no one forgot what had been lost and found. One evening, Ebo vanished. His glowing presence simply faded into mist. Abeni searched the forest, calling his name, touching every sacred root. At the tree of memory, she found a single leaf, pulsing with light. Ebo had not left. He had returned. He had once been human, a keeper betrayed. Long ago, turned spirit by the tree's sorrow. With his purpose fulfilled, he had been allowed rest. Abeni held the leaf to her heart and whispered, "Thank you." A young boy named Temi, known for his mischievous smile, broke the sacred drum during a festival. The villagers panicked. The drum had belonged to the first keeper. Abeni sat with Temi, who wept from guilt. She told him, "Nothing sacred is broken forever." She taught him how to mend it, not by glue, but with gold. The cracks were filled with molten gold, turning the damage into beauty. The villagers were stunned. The broken drum now sang with a deeper, richer sound. Kelechi began seeing strange visions during sleep, of distant lands where forests cried for memory. She told Abeni that their story could not remain in Nambala. The world had other forgotten trees, other lost songs. Abeni agreed. A new path would form, the Wandering Grove. They would travel to other lands, planting heart seeds and telling stories, teaching balance where it had been lost. The forest did not end at the village borders. Abeni and Kelechi prepared for their journey. The entire village gathered in a circle of fireflies and flowers. One by one, villagers placed gifts in their satchels. Healing roots, charms of memory, letters from children. Abeni knelt before Ogbanje one last time. "I am your child," she whispered, "but now I must be your messenger." The tree's branches lowered in blessing, and with that, the two keepers walked into the dawn. Their first stop was a coastal village plagued by salt-dry winds and forgotten forests. The people there had once sung to palm trees, but now built over their roots. Abeni and Kelechi sat in the village square and told the story of Nambala. The villagers scoffed, until a small girl placed her hand on the dry earth and sang. A green shoot broke through the ground. The crowd gasped. The message was clear. Memory can bloom again if given a voice. Abeni and Kelechi journeyed inland to a desert land where the sun painted the sand gold, but the hearts of the people were dry with doubt. Here, once stood the tree of dust. Long, dead from neglect. The people remembered only its thorns, not its fruit. Abeni gathered the village children under its skeletal branches and sang the song of the first seed. Her voice cracked from the heat, but still she sang. At dusk, as the shadows grew long, the roots beneath the sand shifted. A single bud emerged, a promise of return. In the oasis town of Kuma, traders exchanged goods with words. It was here that Kelechi began weaving her tapestries into scrolls, stories stitched into silk. The townspeople gathered around her loom, entranced as each line told of Nambala's rebirth. Abeni stood beside her, planting a heart seed beneath a fig tree in the market center. The tree blossomed by morning. The mayor declared a new custom. Every deal must begin with a story, to honor truth over profit. Following a river upstream, the duo reached a shrine said to house a sleeping oracle. For decades, the villagers had offered silver and song, but received no reply. Abeni approached with silence instead, offering the memory of her exile. The water shimmered. From its depths rose a voice that shook the hills. It praised her humility and declared her river sister. A new spring gushed forth beside the shrine, and the villagers wept. They renamed the river Abeni's Mercy. The town of Kuroko was built near a mountain that had forgotten rain, but a dark cloud now loomed, not of water, but of war. A warlord sought to claim the region's sacred stones to build temples. To his name, Abeni and Kelechi stood in his path. With stories of fallen chiefs and forgotten peace, they sowed doubt in his army. When the first heartseed sprouted between their tents overnight, many soldiers laid down their spears. The warlord, shamed by desertion, left without bloodshed. In a distant village, the sacred flame that once guided lost travelers had gone cold. No one remembered how to relight it. Abeni knelt at its hearth and whispered her tale into the ashes. Kelechi added threads of past fire spirits to the cloth. The flame leapt to life, taller than ever. It now glowed blue, the color of memory. Travelers began returning. Elders proclaimed Abeni as keeper of the flame, but she simply smiled. "I am but the match," she said. "You are the wood." In a valley where once a great forest stood, only stones remained. Abeni walked barefoot over the ruin, listening to the wind. She could hear faint laughter, echoes of what had been. Kelechi planted vines into the cracks. When the first leaves appeared, so did the spirits, soft and playful, like children at dusk. A new garden grew overnight, with flowers that whispered old lullabies. The valley became a sanctuary for orphans, who now had voices in the wind. They arrived at a town that did not speak, not from curse, but from choice. The villagers had seen too much betrayal, and silence had become their shield. Even the trees there refused to rustle. Abeni and Kalechi stayed in silence too. They wove, they tended, they listened. On the 7th day, a child hummed. By the 10th, an elder spoke a greeting. Slowly, words returned like birds after winter. The town was renamed Umoja. The breath returns. In the highlands, a temple of mirrors tested every soul that entered. It showed not faces, but truths. Abeni and Kalechi entered alone, determined. Inside, Abeni saw her own fear, of failure, of fading memory, of becoming another Okonkwo. She sang to her reflection, not to banish the fear, but to embrace it. The mirrors cracked, but with gold. Kalechi emerged wearing a cloak made of light. The temple's guardian bowed, whispering, "You remember what others forget." After many seasons, they turned toward Nambala. Forests grew where once only silence lived. Heart seeds planted far and wide now bloomed across valleys. Messengers from the villages they had helped followed them, each bringing gifts and stories. Abeni
paused beneath a blooming Ogbanje and wept. "We left to bring memory," she said, "and now we return with a future." The wind whispered back, "You have become the forest."
Back in Nambala, a new grove had formed, at the very place Abeni had once been exiled. The villagers, now elders, knelt before her and Kalechi. Ayomid, now grown, stood beside a child with eyes like Ibo's. They planted a final heart seed, not for healing, but for honor. The Grove Eternal would be a place of learning and remembering for all time. As the sun rose, Abeni and Kalechi walked the path between trees, keepers of whispers, guardians of truth. Now home, Abeni sat in the Grove Eternal, listening to the rhythm of children drumming with joy. One child, Deka, struggled to keep time, often falling behind. Other children laughed. Abeni hushed them gently and sat beside Deka, offering her the broken drum once filled with gold. When Deka played it, the rhythm flowed perfectly, steady and strong. The children watched in awe. "You don't need to follow others," Abeni told her. "Only the song that lives in your heart." That day, the village learned the drum's most important rhythm, compassion. Kalechi proposed a new ritual. Every newborn should receive their name beneath the branches of the tree of memory. There, the name would be spoken by all present, woven into the bark by a silken thread and sealed with the child's first cry. The first baby to receive this blessing was named Obioma. The heart is good. As the villagers chanted her name, leaves rustled in approval. The tree absorbed the joy, its bark glowing faintly. A tradition was born, one that would outlive them all. One evening, Ayomid approached Abeni with a lantern carved from sacred wood and lit with spirit fire. "The path must stay lit even when we're gone," she said. Together they climbed the hill where Abeni had once stood trial and placed the lantern there. The lantern never dimmed. Travelers claimed it guided them through fog and fear. It became a symbol of Abeni's legacy, a light that came from darkness, shining not to command, but to welcome. Messengers returned from distant lands with stories of new groves blooming, each begun by a heart seed. A council of keepers was called. Beneath Ogbanje, storytellers, weavers, singers, and spirits from many lands gathered. They shared rituals and laughter, tears and songs. From this gathering emerged a pact, the covenant of the groves. Memory would be guarded across the world, not by one keeper, but by many. The forest was no longer local. It was a living web. One day, Abeni awoke to silence. Not the peaceful kind, but a stillness so complete it felt like absence. Ogbanje stood unmoving. The whispers were gone. Birds perched silently. The village held its breath. Abeni understood. The forest was listening now, not speaking. It was time for humans to carry the voice. She led a procession to the grove and told the longest story of her life, of exile and return, of pain and planting. When she finished, Ogbanje rustled once more and fell still. Kalechi sat beneath the tree of memory and wove her final tapestry. It depicted every place they had visited, every child they had healed, every spirit they had known. Her hands trembled, not with weakness, but with reverence. When she tied the last thread, it shimmered with golden light. The tapestry was buried beneath the tree, a cloth of eternal memory. Kelechi stood and smiled. "We have stitched the world whole," she said. Abeni felt her body growing lighter each day. She knew her time was nearing its end, not with sorrow, but with peace. She visited every part of Nambala, speaking to trees, rivers, stones, and souls. Each whispered back, "Thank you." Her final act was planting one last heart seed in her old exile grove. As she pressed the soil, Aomide joined her. "Will it grow?" she asked. Abeni smiled. "It already has." A moon after Abeni's passing, roots began to surface across Nambala. They glowed faintly in the night, connecting the grove eternal to every tree planted in her name. They pulsed gently, memory made physical. Kelechi, now High Keeper, declared the beginning of the era of whispers. No more would stories fade into silence. They would live in root and branch, river and hill, child and elder. Aomide, with other young keepers, formed the Children's Council, a circle that changed leaders every season, so no voice remained unheard. They listened first, then spoke and ended every meeting with a shared story. They built small memory wells in every village, places to sit, reflect, and speak names of the lost. These became sacred, not for grief but for growth. The children had become the roots Abeni dreamed of. On the 100th year since Abeni's exile, people from all lands gathered in Nambala. The Grove Eternal had grown into a vast forest. In its heart, Ogbanje stood tall, now called the Whispering Tree by all. When the wind moved, it sang. And if one listened closely, they could hear the voice of a girl who once knelt in exile, carrying the burden and the gift, reminding the world, memory is the root of all healing. Never let it fall silent.